Leading this panel is going to be Dr. Val Underbaki. He's an educator, researcher, formerly at the University of South Florida. She's also a founding member of Friends of Human Rights, which began shortly after the arrest of Dr. Sami Al-Arian in 2003. Since that time, she's focused on calling attention to the current wave of preemptive prosecutions in danger of the Patriot Act. She's toured the country educating the public about the erosions of civil rights since 9/11, screening the documentary U.S. v. Al-Arian more than 50 times on campuses, churches, mosques, and community centers, and she serves as the education director of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. So, Dr.
And thank you all for staying, and I'm going to introduce our family members. The first person to speak, I want to thank them for coming. They drove up from North Carolina.
I'll speak right in.
Oh, they drove up from North Carolina just today. And Shkumbim Sharifi, he is the brother of Haitham Sharifi, who was on Friday sentenced to 45 years. So I'm going to let him tell you his story.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Thank you for being here. I want to thank everybody that came out here. I'm here with my two sisters over there, and my brother was recently, Friday, sentenced to 45 years in prison. And I would like to start with a quote of MLK, Martin Luther King, and he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I want to bring up that point because in America, if you look at our history, it repeats itself. You could take it back all the way to American Indians, the way they were treated. The way I see it, America is like a game of tag. Somebody's always it. After the American Indians, you could point out that Japanese or Asians were discriminated against in the height of communism, you know. After that, as everybody knows, it was African Americans. So, unfortunately, after African Americans, Muslims across the United States, after the September 11 attacks, were targeted. And I went to the case. I was there majority of the time. I watched it, and I could tell you, anybody that was standing in that room as you guys are today could tell you that those men are innocent. We all know that. The reason I say that is because the way the prosecutors started its opening statement was, this is not a war on Islam. This case is not about Islam. But let me tell you something about Islam. So I watched the trial, you know, they bring in informant after informant, and you could see some of the jury was even asleep. So that does not make sense, you know. You're putting people's lives here at risk and you're over here sleeping. This was evident to anybody who wanted to watch the trial. And I say this because a lot of the community was backed off, you know. They didn't want anything to do with the word terrorist. So for Muslims, it's guilty until proven innocent, unfortunately. So we don't have those rights. Innocent until proven guilty doesn't exist, you know. What I want to say, if you look at all the cases, you know, I would like to talk about my brother specifically, but the rest of the guys, Omar and Ziyad, they had the same thing, you know. Their character was assassinated, you know. They just wanted to make this picture of them being monsters, you know. They neglected, like, specific things about their characters. They don't want the jury to hear about that. They're just negative. Islam, terrorist, this. So I say this because I was really ignorant to cases like this. I'll be the first to admit. I was ignorant until it happened to me and my family. And I believe, in my opinion, majority of the people are ignorant until it happens to them. Most of our community, or at least society, is not aware of cases like this. If you can see, there's a whole list of them. This is stuff happening in Florida, Detroit, Boston, everywhere. And so I would like to say that I admit I was ignorant until it happened to me. That's how I learned. And I would like to spread the awareness. My brother specifically, we came from Kosovo. I don't know if you guys know the history of it, but we came here as refugees and now are American citizens, but we escaped the war. But through my brother, 23 years of living, he never had a problem, with no law, no criminal, nothing. He played soccer, guitar, skateboarding, drawing, played high school varsity soccer and everything, just average, not average guy because he helped my family a lot. He worked 2 to 3 jobs. He helped translate because he knew English. None of us knew it at the time. So he was basically like a second father to us. When my family would, my mom and dad, they worked overtime. He was taking care of me and my sisters. I have another sister, by the way. These are only 2 right here. But what I want to say is, as soon as he started trying to be a Muslim, he was trying to learn about the faith. Because my country is 90% Muslims, but we don't really practice it the way other countries do. We're more westernized. So he just wanted to learn about it, and the fact that he did that is how he got caught. And I would like to tell you that my brother, just like myself and my sisters and my family, we travel to Kosovo as much as we can because that's where we're from. That's where we take our vacations. So as he did this, we did this too. So the government was trying to say that he was trying to start terrorist groups and all of this unbelievable things, just nasty things. But they were trying to say during court that the word marriage is a key word for trying to join the battlefield. They were trying to say that going to the beach means the same thing. So they were twisting things around. But in fact, my brother did get married to a wife. He got married when he went back to my country, 23 years old. And he has a daughter who he never met. She's 2 years old right now, Sumaya Sharifi. The reason he never met her because during the summer of 2009, I believe, me and my family were in Albania vacation and we were waiting for him. His wife was 7 months, I believe, and we were waiting for him, and he packed his luggage, and he already bought the ticket. That Friday, he got arrested, so he has never met his daughter to this day. She's 2 years old right now. And what I want to say is my brother got entrapped. If you guys really look at all these cases, every case is individual, but if you look at the cases, each unique one, you will see that there's entrapment. The reason I say this is because my brother he would work here like 2 jobs, and then he would go to my country and be with his wife. But he didn't want to come back here. He wanted to live there. So the FBI informants paid his ticket to come over here. In addition, they paid the apartment that he stayed in. They paid for a computer. And this is all court documented. You guys, if you look at it, the court knows this. They paid for it. So all is paid by FBI if you really look at it. He was basically entrapped. His charges were by FBI informants. They invited him to shoot guns. My brother doesn't even know how to work a gun. So they added him 10 years for that. And one of the guys in the conspiracy, just the fact that they mentioned his name, he got charged for that. So I would like to make a point that my brother made during the trial as he was sentenced. He said, "You're not charging me of a conspiracy because if you asked all the guys of conspiracy, did we have an agreement? Everybody said no. So there wasn't an agreement. Basically, you're charging me of an ideology. So this is a thought crime." And he brought a case of where an individual killed 16 people and he got 16 years in prison, but he got let go off early. But my brother, as the rest of the brothers, he did not touch anybody. No one was harmed, but it was just a crime, thought crime. They were saying, "We know what you were going to do." And I would like to say that a lot of the stuff that happened in the trial, if you were just there, you could tell that there was nothing to it. I don't know how you could give somebody 15 years for one of the brothers, just Facebook comments, he said in his Facebook comments, I do not support terrorists, but they will not show that, you know. The prosecutors only will show them the negative aspects of it. And I would like to also point out that my brother, Houston Sharifi, he never had a criminal record, but just the fact that he was labeled a terrorist, he went from 0 to a 6 automatically. And if you're one charge of it, they give you the maximum. So regardless of what you did, just because they say you're a terrorist, you get like 15 years. And personally speaking, I find that to be crazy, because right now, if I go out, rob a bank, I'm not gonna get 45 years like my brother. I get off 15 years the most. I know incidents where somebody got 3 years by robbing a bank. So this is injustice at its highest level. I could talk about my brother for like an hour about how great of a person he is, but you guys really, all these guys are great guys, but the fact is that they were either entrapped or set up by the FBI one way or another. Another thing I would like to mention is a lot of these cases are similar because the FBI asked my brother for a plea agreement, 15 years plus working with the FBI, if he turned his back on the other guys. Now, he did not accept that. And I know the same thing happened to one of the brothers, Omar. The reason why he was put in jail is because he didn't want to help the FBI. But I don't know how, if he is a terrorist, why would you even offer that plea agreement if he's that dangerous? And another thing I would like to point out that the FBI never interviewed me and my family. That's it, you know. They didn't even care about that. They just got in and that's it. They were gonna label him a terrorist and that's it. But my brother was planning a life in my country with his wife and his daughter, and they were trying to say that he wanted to raise all this terrorism, propaganda, and all this stuff. But the fact is that he does have a daughter, he has a wife, and me and my family, we always travel the summers in Kosovo. That's where we're from, so I could go on forever, but I'd just like to say that injustice is at its highest right now. And I think we gotta unite and spread the message because we don't want it to repeat. If it's gonna happen to me, you know, it could happen to one of your relatives, somebody you know. Because as soon as the brothers got arrested, it was all over the news, Japan, India, everywhere. This was international news, and then you didn't hear from them in a while. You know, the media only shows the negative stuff. If somebody, say in Washington right now, shoots somebody and he's not Muslim, he's not going to say a Christian or Orthodox man shot this guy. He's just going to say blank blank did this crime. But if it's an Islamic or a Muslim man, it's going to be on national news. And I would just like to thank everybody for listening and taking this time out. I could go on forever, but I'm going to give everybody else the opportunity to say their side, their viewpoints. But thanks again.
I'm going to introduce next Leila Yagi. Her son Ziad was also involved in this case, and she's written a lot of poetry, and she's traveled around speaking for him. So, hear from her.
Hi everybody, I'm the mother of Ziad Yagi. He's the co-defendant with Hassan Sharifi and Omar Hassan. So since he spoke about his brother, I'm going to speak for Ziad and for Omar because they both can speak about themselves. Omar and Ziad went overseas for a trip. Both of them were trying to get married. Omar and Ziad went together, but Omar wanted to go there because his wife went first, the girl he was interested in getting married to. And both his parents had issues with him getting married to a specific lady. So Omar kind of, was almost like running away from his home, and he took my son with him. And from there, they went on to Palestine, where we are Palestinian, Jordanians, Americans. So they were denied entry, and from then on, they went on to Jordan, and from Jordan to Egypt. Now, 90% of my family members live in Jordan, and of course, Omar's family probably the same thing. So, of course, the same thing. They said that marriage meant a code word for jihad, and the beach, the same thing. And of course, my son, you can see pictures of him and Omar in Egypt at the beach. Okay, and they're having fun, and they're kids, and they're like really young, 19 years old. But I mean, they made like a big deal out of everything. So I'm going to read you something I wrote because I can focus a little bit better when I read. And we can also go on Facebook and read more about me and my son. And Kumbin also has his brother over there. You could read about that. You could also Google my name or Google my son's name. You could just put in our last name, Y-A-G-H-I, and my first name, L-A-I-L-A, or my son's name, Z-I-Y-A-D. And please do not listen to what the press says, because they just want to portray Muslims as terrorists. And they're for some reason, they just want to do that. I can't understand, honestly. Okay. It is something that if we had it in front of our eyes constantly, then we'd all speak the truth. It is the believing in a day when we all will be accounted for our actions, a day that we will all stand before a greater judge. Death comes to one unexpectedly, and the judges and prosecutors are not immune to it. So what have they gained from the lies that they fabricated against 3 innocent young men? Every day I wonder why this happened to us. Why do I have to rock myself to sleep, or not sleep at all? Why has my son been given a barbaric sentence when he did not harm any human being, or even inflict injury on anyone? It is indeed the new Jim Crow law. We need to stop being slaves to the system. The only one who is worthy of us being slaves to is our Creator. When we realize that the 1%ers are feeding off the 99%ers, when we wake up from our sedated, brainwashed state, when we stand in solidarity as the people in Egypt stood, when we speak the truth and stand up against oppression, then and only then will we ever create change. But as long as we sit and watch hours and hours of TV and not care about the ones who are inflicted with pain and hide behind our closed doors, the system will never change. Do you know that while awaiting sentencing, I was not only in pain for me, but for all the victims and their families? Thus my pain multiplied. If we started to have a conscience, to feel with the people who are being oppressed, then change will begin to happen. I will tell you about some of the lies that were made up by the FBI and the prosecutors. When one of my son's co-defendants was arrested and was questioned about my son, he said that my son never had any idea that he had, but later changed his statement after pleading guilty. As my son said yesterday morning when he called, they did everything possible for me to lose the trial. They denied me a speedy trial. They punished me because I did not plead guilty. They wanted me to spend at least 5 years in jail before an appeal. Even if I won an appeal, I would have spent 5 years in jail for absolutely doing nothing. If you look at all the cases similar to my son's case, most of them, if not all of them, have one thing in common. They all spoke against the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. except that my son really did not speak against the war. He was too young and immature, but his co-defendant did. So now we know why many of these men are accused of conspiracy and material support. Their crimes that the FBI concocted had no basis. Material support to whom? How is my son convicted of material support when he did not spend any money on anything illegal or any terrorist organization? How is he convicted of conspiracy when there hasn't been a crime that has taken place or even a plan to commit a crime? Even when his co-defendant, Daniel Boyd, the so-called ringleader, as the prosecutors called him, pled guilty so he can save his house from being repossessed by the government and have his sons get out of jail in no time, admitted when cross-examined that there wasn't any agreement between him and my son to conspire to kill or maim people abroad or anywhere else for that matter. Moreover, he stated that he and the co-defendants never had a plan to do any kind of harm to anyone. My son's life was put in the hands of an uninformed, not well-educated, not traveled, and elderly people, who some of them, mind you, can barely walk and keep awake. We're anxious of getting this ordeal over, and in favor of whom? Of course, the convincing prosecutors. Not only that, the prosecutors kept showing pictures of jihadists beheading and killing people. And they brought this so-called expert, Evan Coleman, to testify against the co-defendants. His testimony had no basis, since he does not even know the co-defendants. His fabricated fantasy to portray Muslim people as violent worked well with an uneducated, uninformed jury, whose mind is preset based on how Muslims are portrayed post 9/11. So now 3 innocent young men lie in jail for a simple trip they took overseas. Families have been ripped apart, destroyed and shattered. A country that feeds off of putting innocent people in jail. I am so ashamed of my country, ashamed of its lies, ashamed of its war on its own citizens, just because of their religious beliefs. How will God bless this country if it oppresses its own people? And 99% of these cases get convicted even though there is not any evidence of anything. And remember, not any crime has taken place. It is as if the prosecutors either scare the judges to comply with what they want, or they will lose their jobs, or more likely work together in conspiring to kill and maim the truth. There is something going on behind the scenes that no one knows but God. Thank you, guys.
Our next speaker is Mariam El-Sayed. She's a longtime family friend of the Abu Ali family. She's representing Mariam Abu Ali, who's unable to be here today. And Ahmed Abu Ali, I'm going to let her tell you about him, but I believe the last I heard he's in prison scheduled for life. And let her tell you about him.
Thank you, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. Mariam wanted to let you know that she really would have come here if she wasn't very sick. So I hope I do as well as she would have if she was here. Ahmed's case is actually unlike the cases you've heard about so far. There was no entrapment. There was no talk against the government or against its activities abroad. Ahmed was a U.S. citizen studying Islamic studies in Medina University on a scholarship. He was a valedictorian of his class, so he got a full scholarship to study Islamic studies at the University of Medina. A 22-year-old student taking his final exams was arrested by Mabahith officers, the intelligence officers there, basically the equivalent of the FBI, while taking his final exam. He was taken to a prison in Medina and was held there and tortured. His family wasn't even informed of his arrest. And this was back in 2003. Held in Medina prison, Ahmed was then transferred to a prison in Riyadh, which is notorious for its torture. Al-Hattab prison. Just Google Al-Hattab prison and see what you find. The United States State Department has reports that are issued about different countries and about the conditions that their prisoners are subjected to, including Saudi Arabia. And if you look at the State Department report about Saudi Arabia, you'll see that it's replete with documentation of human rights abuses. Yet when it came to this case, the U.S. government stood with the Saudi Arabian government and denied any such torture, not just in this case, but generally, that Saudi Arabian witnesses were able to stand in front of an American jury via teleconference and say, we do not torture prisoners. And let me tell you how we got to an American courtroom. Ahmed was kept in Saudi Arabia for 2 years, was tortured there, was made to confess in front of a camera, reading a written confession that was prepared by the Saudi torturers. And if you watch the video, I don't know if it's online, but if you watch the video, there's the subscript, and you can see that at certain points he says, Haman, basically asking the people who are recording him if what he's doing is what they want him to do. So he read this written confession, and it was in their hands since 2003. But Ahmed stayed in the Saudi prison for 2 more years. No attorney, no contact with his family except as the Saudi jailers would let him. Very limited contact over the phone. No attorney, no charges. He doesn't know what he's being held for. And during that time, his family was scrambling to find out, well, who was behind this? Is it the Saudi government? Is it the U.S. government? And the Saudi government insisted to the family that they have nothing against him. They're holding him for 2 years, but they say we have nothing against him, and we're only doing this at the behest of the United States government. Excuse me. Meanwhile, as the family contacts the U.S. government and sends letters to the White House, they get a letter from the White House wishing them best luck as they deal with the Saudi government. We can't infringe on their sovereignty. They arrested him. They have something against him. Well, the family couldn't believe both governments at once. So they filed suit in the federal court in the District of Columbia. And the habeas corpus petition was allowed to proceed. Judge Bates in D.C. ordered that discovery would continue. And instead of complying with the order, the U.S. government decided to fly him over. FBI agents who were not involved in Ahmed's arrest or torture were suddenly able to bring him out of the Saudi prison and bring him here to a federal court in Alexandria and charge him with 6 counts. 6 counts, including conspiracy to assassinate President Bush. Well, what was the evidence that they had against Ahmed? If you look at the evidence that was introduced in court, it was mainly Ahmed's confession, that recorded confession in Saudi authorities' control. That video was not just kept with the Saudis. That video was given to the FBI back in 2003, as discovery would later show. So the FBI had this video of a person saying, I was conspiring with a group of people to kill so-and-so and to do this, and we had a sleeper cell, all of this crazy stuff. But the FBI still had no interest in Ahmed. The FBI didn't think he was a threat to the country. They didn't try to bring him or do anything. He just stayed in Saudi Arabia for 2 years, no charges, nothing. And on top of that, a family friend of the Abu Ali's got an email from the head of the Washington field office of the FBI saying the FBI does not have any interest in Ahmed Abu Ali. And this is after they had the video. But when they were stuck because the judge ordered discovery, and they would have to show that they were dealing with the Saudi government to keep Ahmed behind bars in Saudi Arabia, it all came out in court again. They brought him to charge him, but discovery showed how they were actually working. It was a proxy detention by the Saudi authorities at the behest of the United States. And if you think that this is something that's out of the movies, go read about this case. And if you think it can't happen to you, look at what the National Defense Authorization Act gives the government right now. The power that they have right now is more than the power that they had back when Ahmed was arrested. And this could be anybody today. Ahmed was a U.S. citizen, but his blue passport did not help him when he was in Saudi Arabia. And it didn't help him when he was here in court. Ahmed, when he first was flown and brought before magistrates so that he could be arraigned, he offered to show the judge his back. He said, look at my back, I was tortured. And the judge said, you'll have an opportunity later, this is not the time for it. Sure, we have a system here, we'll follow the procedures. Well, when his lawyers tried to introduce expert testimony from doctors who testify in courts all around the country and are found to be expert witnesses, those same witnesses were not allowed to testify on Ahmed's behalf. They produced reports after examining him showing that he showed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but after 2 years from the time that he was tortured, the scars were still on his back. So if you can imagine how brutal the torture was. And in pretrial hearings, Ahmed actually testified and told the court how he was tortured. He was tied to the ground. His 2 hands were tied, and he was kneeling forward. And a hard object was being used to beat him on his back. When he was finally let go of and allowed to go back to his cell, he touched his back and his hand was full of blood. That is how brutal the Saudi regime is. And the FBI was not merely being informed of what Ahmed was saying and what the confession included. FBI actually, as discovery later showed, was flying over to Saudi Arabia, attending Ahmed's interrogation through a one-way mirror so that they could see what's happening and he can't see them. And they were even submitting questions, interrogation questions, suggesting to the Saudi authorities what they should ask Ahmed. So a U.S. citizen studying abroad on a full scholarship ends up in a Saudi jail, in a dungeon, arrested and tortured without the protection of his own government. And to make things worse, the evidence that was obtained under torture was used to convict him here. A jury was not allowed to see the evidence showing that Ahmed was tortured, was not allowed to see the psychiatrist's reports about his post-traumatic stress disorder, was only able to see the reports from the government's experts saying that it's self-inflicted wounds. Ahmed self-inflicted his scars, basically, were a result of his self-inflicted wounds. So a jury convicted him on all counts. And after the 6 counts were handed out by the grand jury, the government got a superseding indictment with 3 more counts, including a count saying that Ahmed was conspiring to release some prisoners in Guantanamo.
Oh, gosh. All prisoners in Guantanamo.
So they were ridiculous charges, unheard of, and I think this case is unprecedented. If you just go back and read more about this case, you will be astonished to see the kinds of things that this government can do, the kinds of things that the Bush administration did to prove that it's succeeding the war on terror. The press conferences that Ashcroft would come out in and say, we successfully prosecuted so-and-so, and you think, yes, the government is protecting us. Yes, those 9/11 terrorists are being captured and our government is protecting us now. We're less afraid. But these are the stories that you don't get to see in the media. This is actually what's happening. When you hear that somebody's been captured, don't feel any safer, because whoever is actually doing it is still out there. The innocent people are the ones who are being captured. And Ahmed was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Go back to his case. He was convicted and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And he appealed his case to the 4th Circuit. The government cross-appealed, saying that 30 years is not enough. Ahmed needs to get life in prison. The 4th Circuit decided that yes, Ahmed's conviction should stand, and they reversed the sentence, asking the lower court to give him life in prison. So Ahmed was resentenced to life in prison. And ever since his arrest, even pre-trial, he's been under what's called the SAM measures, or Special Administrative Measures. And they basically seclude Ahmed from the world. He's not allowed to contact anybody other than his immediate family. The books he reads are monitored and screened. He couldn't get Jimmy Carter's book, Peace Not Apartheid, because it contains some dangerous material. He couldn't get President Obama's 2 books because they were too dangerous for him to read. These are the special administrative measures that the prison system uses. And right now, he's serving his sentence in solitary confinement in the Supermax in Colorado, 20 meters underground, in a 7x12 cell, all by himself for 23 hours a day. Well, in lockdown for 23 hours a day, and then he gets to get out for 1 hour a day where he gets to exercise on his own. His conditions are so brutal that he went on a hunger strike for a while. It was a long hunger strike that really affected his health till this day. And Ahmed, until today, cannot contact the outside world. Nobody has heard anything from him, except for that last sentencing statement that he made during his resentencing to the judge. The judge resentenced him to life in prison, and he's still serving in that same prison, but he has his last chance at justice. Ahmed's case should not be studied as a case in history. Ahmed's case is still going on 8 years later. He's filing the petition for habeas corpus. And basically, a petition for habeas corpus asks the court to rule on the lawfulness or the unlawfulness of his detention. And his lawyers are working on his case and should be filing by April. That's their deadline. And right now, we're restarting our campaign to help Ahmed's family so that they can pay their lawyers. And I hope that all of you have gained some interest in this case and will go online and read more about it. Go to www.freeahmed.com. That's FREEAHMED.com. You can also follow him on Twitter. It's Help Bring Ahmed Home. Or on Facebook, join the Facebook group called Help Free Ahmed Campaign, Help Bring Ahmed Home. We need your help, not just your donations, and raising awareness. Help us pay the lawyers so they can effectively defend him. And tell your friends about this case. If you never heard about this case today, I'm sure that your friends haven't, or before today, I'm sure your friends haven't heard about it yet. So take this and go beyond this group to tell others about it and tell them to help the family so that they can have a chance at justice. Because Ahmed did not have a chance at justice until today. We have brochures out on the table, and we have flyers also for more information. So please pick one up and help the family. Thank you.
I'm going to show a short video of one other case. And while he's setting this up, let me tell you about this. The case is of Samuel Arian, who was a longtime friend and colleague of mine. He was a tenured professor at the University of South Florida, where I used to also work. And I also knew him in a different neighborhood. An organization called Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality. We were all members of that. He and I served on the education committee together. And we're longtime friends. But it's a very short video, and then I'm going to put a face on some of these cases and a few others. And there are a lot of them as we come today.
Tonight, terrorism in Tampa. After years of investigation by government agencies, the feds make their move and arrest suspended USF professor Sandy Al-Arian.
In his capacity as a leader in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, he directed the audit of all monies and property of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad throughout the world.
I was the only person who was not convicted. And I was put in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and sometimes for weeks, 24 hours a day. I wasn't allowed even to see my attorneys, which you counseling. I wasn't allowed to call my families for 6 months. I was not allowed to make a single phone call.
Sandy Al-Arian arrived to court this morning before 9 a.m. under heavy security for a trial that's gained national and international attention.
Al-Arian's defense attorney says this case is about a basic American right, the freedom of speech.
This is a First Amendment case, and then you have a right to be a member, you have a right to be a supporter, you have a right to take positions based on the violence. This is all First Amendment stuff. This is pure First Amendment stuff.
For 5 months, the prosecutors laid out in detail a case painting Al-Arian as the North American leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But as news journalist Steve Andrews tells us, Once the government rested its case, so did Al-Arian's defense without calling one witness.
The United States of America versus Sammy Amin Al-Arian. I'll read the paragraph for which we have a verdict. As to the offense of conspiracy to murder or maim persons at places outside the United States, we, the jury, find the defendant, Sammy Amin Al-Arian, not guilty.
The judge started reading 20 minutes of not guilty verdicts. It was unbelievable.
It's not one guilty verdict. In 51 counts for 4 of these men, that's 200 counts. They didn't have a guilty verdict.
Mr. Al-Arian was not directly linked to any of the violent acts that we showed during the trial.
Prosecutors admitted their case lacks hard evidence linking any of the defendants to those violent acts, but they say that in a conspiracy, such evidence is not required.
Why did you vote not guilty on just about every count? I didn't see the evidence. There was no evidence of what you done. Not enough.
You know, a lot of it, I felt it was hearsay.
What would it take for a guilty verdict? Evidence.
Can you hear me okay? I'll try to talk about it. That case, the trial ended in 2005. This video was made a few years ago, but he's still not free. He's right now he's in house arrest, and he's with no end in sight, actually. And this was after we get in just a few more minutes. We're going to have time for questions for everybody here. And again, I was at Sammy's trial pretty much every day, and at all these hearings. Are there any questions now while we're...
You say he's at home right now?
Can I do one?
He's at home right now?
He's in house arrest. He can't go anywhere. He can't go
But
out
he's
the
in
door.
his house.
He's in his house.
That's what house arrest
His house, yes.
What's the
Which is
legal
much better
basis?
than being in solitary.
What's the legal basis for his house arrest now?
Because they couldn't convict him, they then charged him with another crime later, which is criminal contempt, that he refused to testify before a grand jury. In a case where the prosecution said, we'll make a deal with you and send you home right away, you'll never have to testify again. Then they called him to testify, said, I'm not going to testify. Then they put him pending another criminal case. So he's waiting trial again for a case for now 3 years. And there's been pretrial motions. The judge has been sitting on this case now for over 2 years, and she has not made a decision on one single motion for 2 years, over 2 years now.
I want to just tell you that a lot of people need educating in this country, and you probably know that. And the clips came from this documentary, USA versus Al-Arian. And I have 3 of them left, so if you know people that need educating, if you're a teacher and you've got classes, that would be very good. I mean, it's an excellent. It's got interviews with Sammy and all kinds of bonus material on here. So I want to just tell you how I first came to my introduction to preemptive prosecutions, which is prosecutions before a crime happened and thought crimes for the most part. Okay, this is Mazen al-Najjar, that's Sammy's brother-in-law. This is before Sammy's arrest. Mazen spent 3.5 years in solitary confinement because they were trying to get him to say something incriminating about Sammy. And after 3.5 years, this is secret evidence and no charges. After 3.5 years, the judge ordered him released until he got deported, along with his kids and his 3 kids and his wife got deported. This is another of the co-defendants in Sammy's trial, and he was found totally innocent, totally acquitted on every charge, but he went,
Library closes at 5, so we have less than a half hour.
okay, I'm on with this one too. Okay, see, anyway, he spent another 6 months in an immigration detention center, and then he was deported. And speaking, somebody mentioned academic places. That he was about 2 months away from getting his PhD at the University of South Florida, and they wouldn't let him finish. Hatem Faris, another co-defendant, and he spent, the jury thought he was innocent. He spent 3.5 years in the communications management unit anyway, which is similar to the Supermax, not quite as bad, I don't think. And I just want to show you just a few other cases. I'm just going to show pictures now to put a face on it. These are some of the cases that grabbed my attention, and I don't have time to give you any details, but they all, one thing they have in common, these are all good people. None of them committed any violence. None of them were even accused of any violence. And none of them did any crimes as we think of crimes, as you and I think of crimes. So Dr. Ashkar was a professor at Howard University. He got sentenced to 11 years, even though the jury acquitted him. He won that case. And Gassan Awashi was one of the co-founders of Holy Land Foundation, which he was sentenced to 65 years for basically giving money to hospitals in Palestine. This is his family. This is his son, Omar. Went to hug him and say goodbye at one time, and that's against prison rules. And so he wasn't allowed any contact with his family for 1.5 years. Okay, Fahad Hashmi, the American citizen, he's sentenced to 15 years. He says, Shifa Siddiqui, is Sharman here? His sister was sitting at the table outside, so we asked her about him. This is, he got right after his wedding in Bangladesh. He's an American citizen, but that's his wedding picture. That's when he was abducted, and then he spent 3.5 years in prison in solitary confinement. Again, that happens to, if you read somebody who was arrested for terrorism, just know that they're in solitary confinement before the trial. And this is the picture of Omar Abu Ali from last week. We heard about him a minute ago. And this is Ziad Jagi and Omar Hassan. I'm sorry I don't have Hisam up here. We tried, we couldn't get those. But it's Ziad on the left and Omar. And I want to end on a positive note. And this is another Tampa case. It's Youssef Mutahed. He was actually arrested in South Carolina, but he was tried in Tampa. He went to trial. He had a lot of community support, and he had positive media attention. And I think largely that's because everybody learned a lot from Sammy's trial. It was so outrageous. And so he was acquitted by the jury, and then immigration, of course, arrested him again 3 days later and put him back in jail. And again, he had community support, positive media attention. The immigration judge released him, did not report him on that. As far as we know, that's the first time that's ever happened. So, and I want to just say that we can. I'm optimistic. This is sounding pretty grim, but I think if we're all standing together, we support the victims, we support the families, I think we can have more successes like this. And I thank you all for coming and doing that. And I think there are people from Occupy Washington here. Am I right? Raise your hand if you're from Occupy Washington. Okay, thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Mel, can I just make a quick announcement?
Yes.
Okay. There are some cards outside that we're preparing to send to prisoners.
Thank you.
And I believe it's particularly the 3 people that were just in here today. So if you'd please stop and send them a note. This would be a huge help for them to know the kind of community support they